In the last video, we talked about 3 of the 5 wars that Great Britain fought against France during this near-century warfare, 1689 to 1783. We're going to talk about the 4th one now. That, of course, is the French and Indian War. All the wars that we have talked about before have started in Europe and bled over into the New World. The French and Indian War is different. It starts in the New World and goes over to Europe. And it started by a person that you've probably have heard of. His name was George Washington. Let me set the backstory. In 1754, French soldiers established a fort in the Ohio Valley. If you look at a map of America, North America, you'll notice that the Ohio Valley is right at the back in the frontier region of the English colonies. And as long as whoever controls that valley can control the future of English spreading of its colonies. So the French established this fort known as Fort Duquesne, and it's going to be up to a Virginia lieutenant colonel named George Washington to go out and kick the French out. So this, by the way, this fort is located pretty much in Pennsylvania. So the question would be, what is a Virginia militiaman doing in Pennsylvania? Well, the answer is that the Pennsylvanians and the Virginians, they dispute the territories that makes up the colony of Pennsylvania, the colony of Virginia. So Pennsylvania and Virginia, they have claim over the territory where Fort Duquesne is located. So Washington goes and he demands that the French leave Fort Duquesne. Of course, the French say, no, we're not going to. And now George Washington has to go back and report to his governor that the expedition had failed. Well, along the way, they encounter basically a French reconnaissance force. And Washington's men, which include a number of Indian allies, attack this reconnaissance force and kill everybody but one. And that lone survivor goes back to his superiors and tells them what happened. Well, as you can imagine, the French are going to want revenge. And so they go and they're going to go and they're going to seek out Washington and his men, and they're easy to find. Washington is going to establish a fort, and it's called Fort Necessity. And if you want to learn about how not to build a fort, Fort Necessity would be an excellent thing to read about. How you locate it, and how you're going to keep it properly drained when it comes to water, because we're talking about the age of muskets and balls, not encased bullets that you can fire when wet. But nonetheless, Fort Necessity was a disaster for Washington, and he's forced to surrender. Now Washington's going to show a major Achilles heel here when it comes to his surrender. You see, he doesn't speak or read French, so he has to have it translated to him. And so the French draw up a surrender document, and the translator apparently failed to tell him that in the document it talked about the assassination of some of these French officers that were part of this reconnaissance force. So the result is that Washington basically has signed his own guilt of assassinating these French officers. So it's a black mark in Washington's record, but nonetheless, we now are going to have war. The British officials are going to fear that the Iroquois and the 5 other nations are going to ally with the French. And the colonists are going to fear that their disunity, their distrust of one another, is going to be an asset to the French. So in steps a man named Benjamin Franklin. He shows up and he says, hey, let's get together and come up with this sort of plan of union, like basically kind of like a small nation to organize our defense. And they all meet in a place known as Albany, New York, and it's called the Albany Congress. And they get there, and and 7 of the 13 colonies show up. Well, anything that they decide anyway is moot, because of the fact that the British government's going to completely reject it all. We're talking about some major provisions that are going to make them more independent and autonomous than the English are comfortable for making. But nonetheless, the stage is now set for a very large war fought not only here in the Americas, but fought elsewhere. You're going to fight it in Europe. We're going to fight it over in the Far East. It's one of the first truly world wars that we'll ever see.